And now, cried Max, let the wild rumpus start.
Command Control Power is brought to you commercial-free thanks to the support of our community. Our VIP supporters include Jason Detbarn of Adigy.com, Taylor Boyko of SimpleMDM.com, Collide.co, John Brown of GroveTech.co, Alan Hancock of Watchman Monitoring, and Adam Angst of Tidbits Content Network. Thanks very much for supporting the show.
This week on Command Control Power, we are featuring a patron-only show for our supporters. If you're already subscribed on Patreon, you will find this week's show in your private podcast feed. To sign up and get instant access to special features, go to commandcontrolpower.com and click on Support. For our general audience, we're featuring a classic episode from our catalog of nearly 500 episodes. We hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Command Control Power. We are very pleased to be joined this week by John O'Fallon of Maxum Development. You probably know of Maxum, makers of Rumpus. Thanks for being here, John.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
So we're just kind of talking off the air about how you got into this computer racket, and you said it started about 20 years ago.
Yeah, it did. November of 1994. Was the release of Maxum's first internet server product, which is called NetCloak. And it was kind of back when the web was a bunch of static web pages. Literally just static web pages. NetCloak was a server-side tool that gave webmasters the ability to add dynamic content to the pages.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. And it's reverting back to static pages now in a lot of blogs, right? That's kind of the fashion lately is just, series of static pages that, render more quickly and stuff like that. But back then it was just all HTML, I guess.
Yeah, it was. We're talking Netscape Navigator, 0.90 days. And yeah, you couldn't display the time on a web page. Just didn't happen.
Wow. But did the blink tag exist back then for some dynamic content?
Tragically, it did. Yeah.
Okay, that's the important.
Yeah, but this was actually before. I was around when they added forms to Mosaic back in the day. So this was before forms even existed online.
Wow, and so I see that's one of the other products you guys had back then. NetForms, or is that part of NetCloak?
It was a separate product, and it was basically what we would consider now a blogging tool. The concept was pretty simple. You could create a form, and then you could create a template, and it basically just did a merge with the data that the user entered into the form. It merged it with the template and published a web page. Essentially, a rudimentary blogging tool. And yeah, it was back then. We didn't have PHP, we didn't have SQL databases. We had none of that, so it was a standalone product.
So was that like visitor-facing forms, like almost like a guest book kind of system, or?
Yeah, we had a guest book demo in NetForms 1.0. We had a guest book example. We had a recipes example where people could enter a recipe and it would show up on a website. You could use it for basic bulletin board type stuff. Basically, anytime you wanted to have someone on the web publish content to the web. Wow. And like I said, today it seems like second nature. But I've actually, as recently as a couple of years ago, had attorneys call and ask for old manuals and source code, because back then it was pretty, like I said, forms didn't even exist, and it followed the introduction of forms by literally a couple of months.
Wow!
So it was all new stuff back then.
So these are, I guess, prior art searches to try to invalidate some patents and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Someone is suing because over some blogging mechanism, and it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's complete bull. That stuff isn't new, but someone's trying to say that it is, so they'll look up and find NetForms and they'll ask me for the source code.
So not that you need another side project, but you probably could make a pretty good living as a expert witness at some of these trials, maybe.
Well, that stuff doesn't come up as often as it did. It was really bad probably in the late 90s and early 2000s. I don't get those calls too often anymore because now everybody understands what it is.
And how did the company evolve into Rumpus? And for those of you who are unfamiliar, Rumpus is a web-based and FTP-based file transfer solution for not only Mac, which we're most familiar with it is, but also for Windows as well. So over time, how did you evolve into Rumpus, and when did that actually hit the marketplace, and how has that changed?
So NetCloak and NetForms were part of something that Apple sold called the Apple Internet Server Solution. And this is back in the OS 7 days. And Apple, they didn't have a server box. So they bundled software from all these third parties, and they put it together, and they just Apple acted as basically a reseller for all these things. And the one piece that they notably didn't have in the package was an FTP server. So Apple called us and said, "Hey, we need an FTP server." So we wrote it, and it was basically the first commercial FTP server for the Mac. And then it sold pretty well. The Apple Internet Server Solution went away when Steve Jobs came in to take over Apple, because the whole thing went to Unix, and then there were FTP servers. They could choose any FTP server they wanted. But we evolved the product so that it became not just an FTP server, but a file transfer solution, to the point where today it does FTP, FTPS, FSFTP, and most notably HTTP and WebDAV. So it's basically a web front end for FTP services.
So Apple actually approached you as Maxum Development. I mean, how did that relationship come about?
Well, like I said, back in 1995, the internet was a small world, and we would see the same people at all the same conferences. There were these conferences called WebEdge and Mactivity Web, and these conferences, Macworld, and so the same people knew everybody. And we were a tiny little company, but in the sort of pre-dawn era of the internet, we were considered, about as real as it got. So, so Apple came to us and asked us to do the FTP server, and we actually ended up writing the web server that was originally built into the Mac OS as well.
Really?
Yeah. If you have a Mac OS 7, 8, or 9 Mac, and you go to personal web sharing, you'll see that it's copyright Maxum Development.
Wow.
That's pretty awesome, man. I think Joe has a few of those in his, what do you call that, Joe? Your museum?
My Mac museum, yes. Yeah. I'll have to boot some of those up pretty soon. Check that out.
So with the installed base of Macs at the time, John, was it, I certainly don't want you to quote any numbers here, but was it an attractive contract to have, or an attractive arrangement, or was it just more sort of bragging rights?
For the FTP server or for the web server?
Yeah, a little bit of both.
Well, the web server was good, or the FTP server was good, because not a lot of people bought the Apple Internet Server Solution, but it bought you a ton of mind share. Overnight, we became the de facto FTP server for Mac. So that was kind of cool. So, Apple didn't give their vendors very much money for those. But like I said, we were, if you needed an FTP server and you were putting the server together for yourself, you bought our FTP server. So that was pretty good. And the web server we developed strictly for Apple. That was we never sold that. It was based on, we had a product back then, called Rush Hour. And we built Rush Hour as a graphics accelerator for the web. It was basically a web server that did nothing but serve graphics, and it was optimized for that. And this is back when, a decent computer was running at 25 megahertz.
Mm-hmm.
So the web, despite the fact that everyone had 56K baud modems, the CPU could actually be the bottleneck. So our goal was, or what we said was, well, we're going to make a secondary web server, and it's going to be optimized just for GIF and JPEG images. And a few people bought it, but that server engine is what caught Apple's eye, because it was really good, fast server engine. So that's why they ended up contracting us to build that web server.
And how big was your team back at that time? Was it just you and a couple of buddies, or was it?
More or less, yeah. I mean, we're talking about software that was the server took us probably 6 months, and there were probably 4 of us on it full time.
Very impressive.
Yeah. Well, we had a really solid server engine that we were working from, but Apple's QA requirements, even back then, I mean, it was crazy. Their QA requirements were just brutal. We couldn't get sign off on the project until the server ran for 31 days nonstop in a lab on a shelf in Cupertino. And it couldn't crash. So you get to 28 days and you'd have an out of memory error because the machine only had 8 megs of RAM, and it went down. And we'd get a call from our contact. He'd say, we got to start the test again. It's like,
oh man, wow. That's brutal.
Yeah. It was payment contingent on this as well?
Oh, yeah. We didn't get paid until the project was done. So it was good software. It was solid, and it improved our products, too, because, some of that code is still in Rumpus.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that is neat.
Not a lot of it, but some.
Yeah.
So you said you effectively became the de facto, FTP server back in those days around, what was it, System 7 era?
Yeah, exactly.
And, to basically our eyes, you're still kind of the de facto FTP server, for the Mac anyway, what we have experience with. So that's a pretty good run for 20 years, being basically the go-to FTP server. That's pretty impressive. Yeah,
well, I appreciate it. I think it's a testament not necessarily to the software, because, now that the Mac is Unix-based, there's a ton of that kind of software out there, but it's more customer service. It's always been really, really important to me. We've never charged for customer service. I think it's ridiculous that people charge for tech support. You bought the product, you have a right to use it. If you have a question about it, you should be able to ask someone. And that kind of attitude, I think, is why we're still around.
That is an incredibly awesome philosophy, I have to say. I wish more vendors would work like that. But I know personally, I reached out to you, I think it was last week, and you responded to my email within, I don't want to say you'll always do this, but within like 5 minutes, I think it was. And It was just a certificate or security question, and you were right there. So I've never had trouble with that. And the fact that you don't charge for that and you think it's crazy to do that is just awesome to hear.
Well, when I can, if your question is hard and it makes me think, then it might be a day or so.
So wait, my question was so easy that you were able to answer it quickly.
Well, the certificate questions usually, it's the same 6 questions. It's a confusing topic, but everyone gets stuck on the same stuff. So
that's funny.
How did you make that transition to move forward? Was it an easy decision once Apple went to 10.0 and or did you actually have to really think about that?
Yeah, again, this is going back a few years, but it was a tough time for Maxum because, in hindsight, what Steve Jobs did, and sort of the reverse takeover, Next basically took over Apple, not the other way around, of course. And that was tough for Mac developers because we had invested a lot of resources and energy into developing these products, and all of a sudden the rug, or in this case the OS, is literally pulled out from under us. I have all this code that not much of it runs anymore. It's all, I can't even remember, Carbon. It was all Carbon based, and we had this huge, in software that all of your investment is in the development of that stuff. And, when they made the switch to OS 10, all that classic Mac OS stuff went away. And all of a sudden, if you were a Unix developer, you had a huge leg up. We had spent a decade developing Mac software, and now all of a sudden we were at a disadvantage to the Unix guys. So it was a hard transition. And Rumpus version 3 stayed Carbon-based. It stayed basically a Mac OS 9 application that could run on OS 10, and it stayed that way for about a year. And people just kept buying the product and supporting it. And so, at a certain point, I made the decision. It's like, okay, we're going to rewrite this thing for OS 10, and that was Rumpus 4. 12 years ago now.
So was that in question at one time? Were you kind of waiting to see what would happen moving forward and possibly not write it for OS 10?
Yeah, so, when OS 10 hit the market, 10.0, 10.1 were not very good. By the time they got to 10.2 and 10.3 in particular, it started to be a real stable OS. Maxum at the time had 5 products. We had NetCloak, NetForms, we had a Phantom, which was a web crawler, PageSentry, which was a monitoring tool, and Rumpus. And so the four products generally just sort of faded away, and more of my time went to Rumpus, and people just kept supporting it. Support for those other 4 eventually got replaced with, for example, NetCloak and NetForms were replaced by PHP and Ruby on Rails and, all these other server backends, and they just didn't make sense in a modern, Unix-oriented server world. But the one that people just kept supporting was Rumpus. And so, here it is 20 years later, and that's still the one that's around.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally, and we've talked about this before, but we've recommended it to a ton of our clients, and I think the listeners have also responded with similar feedback. So, of course, there are other products out there, but it seems to have such a big popularity in the Mac community that it's incredible.
Yeah, well, it's pretty stable. It does what it does, and it does it pretty well. Like I said, it's pretty well supported. People get free upgrades for at least a year or 2 after they buy the product, so they don't feel like they're left behind. And yeah, it has a big installed base, which really helps, because when someone's has a friend, if they're in, let's say, the recording industry, and they say, oh, you have a file transfer portal and that works really well. How do you do that? And it's Rumpus. And so word of mouth is basically my only form of advertising. And you only get that by having a big installed base.
And how much had you always developed a Windows product in parallel, or did that come about later on?
No, the Windows version only came out with 7.2.
Okay, and is that growing? Is that a growing user base for you?
Yeah, a lot of people, Apple, is more of a consumer product. They don't have the server that they did a few years ago, and a lot of the virtualization is a lot better on the Windows side. So for servers, Windows is, for a lot of people, a lot more attractive. My business is still primarily Mac, and the Windows product, I'm trying to elevate its status up to a full peer. But like, for example, right now, Rumpus 8.0 is out. We're still on version 7.2 of the Windows product. We're working on it. But it's still lagging just a little bit. So I'm a Mac developer. I have a Windows developer who does the Windows version.
I see. By the way, we've got a live chat going on at the moment, John, and I don't know if you obviously, because your screen went blank, you're not able to follow it. But there's a lot of Rumpus love growing through the chat. One of the things that they mention, and again, not to digress too much, is just how nicely you write your technical documents. And I have to say, just echo that thought. It's just great. It's just great to read your stuff, because it's real easy to work with, especially when we're sort of in a clutch situation and we're at a customer site and we just have to sort of parse through what you've written sometimes at a very quick rate. It's been great stuff. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. It's one of the things I feel guilty about sometimes is that, the documentation doesn't get enough love. It's kind of an afterthought. You're always thinking about features, and people want the software to do this and that and the other, and it's real easy to look at documentation and say, kind of as an afterthought, and ideally, the software should just work, but it's not, photo editing software that has a more understandable interface. There's a lot to the product, and it's a server product. It's more technical. So, like I said, I don't think the documentation gets enough love. But I'm glad that you've been happy with it.
Yeah, no, a lot of people have, so thanks.
Yeah, I mean, the video documentation has been great too. There's little short burst videos that you have on certain topics. So,
yeah, again, I'd like to do more of those. The problem with the documentation and the video documentation in particular is new versions. When you move the software forward, it changes in appearance, and now you got to go back and remake all those videos. And it takes time. To do them well, it takes a lot of time. And the last thing you want is just to have it be a quick screen grab type video that you just knock off, and it doesn't, represent your company, or it doesn't explain what it's trying to explain in a coherent way. So, to do one well takes time, but then, you go back and you got to redo them every time you do a new version. So a couple of the videos on the website are a little out of date, and that's also on my to-do list.
one of the things, not to get too specific, but one of the things a lot of people have talked about, and we saw it come up in the chat, was just the fact that OS X server kind of takes over the necessary ports that a lot of services use, like 443 for HTTPS. And I know I got help personally on that issue, but that was brought up a lot, and people even posted a mention of your support article on that. Have you received a lot of requests or calls about that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that's one of my pet peeves, that one particular issue, because it's funny when you bring up a browser and you go to your server's IP address and you get this message saying, web service is off. And it's a little bit like Winnie the Pooh when Winnie talks into Rabbit's hole and he says, is anybody there? And the answer back is, no, there's nobody here. It's like, okay, if I'm going to this address and I'm getting a message that says that it's not working, then something has to be telling me that it's not working. So it's clearly running. It's clearly holding that port. I wish they would just let it go.
Yeah, exactly. When you turn off that service, they should just release that port. But no such luck. You have to end up disabling Apache. And I guess the appreciation for your knowledge base, as opposed to some other vendors that have been mentioned, is it goes so far as to basically show how to do it more sort of permanently, essentially, like by just removing the Apache daemon, for example, or I guess even or just the plist, even, right?
Yeah, well, with LaunchD, I mean, it's not going to let go of that port real easily. If Apache is going to run and take that port, and LaunchD is going to keep Apache running by all means necessary. So yeah, you gotta permanently disable it.
And just as another aside, a prior guest and sponsor of the show, John Schwen from MacMiniVault.com, mentioned that he has quite a few servers running Rumpus in the data center. So it's definitely a common feature that they're running and supporting. So great. It's a great option.
That big install base, it's everywhere.
Well, when I hear about guys like that, it makes me feel good, because it makes me feel like the software is stable. I mean, I spend my life trying to break it, and the result of that is stable. And guys like that won't run software if it's going to crash on them all the time. So
that's right.
And besides Apple doing an OS upgrade, which might make some of this service unreliable, what other sort of things will make you want to do a point release for the product? Do you have things in the pipeline already that you're already thinking about? Well, this release, one release out, 2 releases out, we're going to do this, or does it sort of just kind of flow and it just seems like it's time for an upgrade and build in features?
It's almost all customer driven. Mm-hmm. I mean, I get on a daily basis, I get people saying, I wish Rumpus would do this or that. And, a lot of the times you see where they're coming from, but it's not something that you could apply to a lot of people. So it's, it's just way too specific a feature. So, you try to help them out by suggesting some way of scripting, an event notice or something. But then a lot of times you'll get a similar request across 3 or 4 people, and you realize it's a feature that can be generalized to solve a whole class of problems. And that's the kind of, that's the direction you go for that. And then on those maintenance releases, I mean, that's almost entirely, I'm actually looking at the Rumpus 805 updates list right now, and someone asked if the transcript files can include a timestamp. Well, of course they should do that. I can't believe they haven't. So that's being added for 805. Or under Yosemite, some people are having problems installing. It's a privileges issue, so we had to redo how the installer handles privileges. And again, it's all based on what customers actually need and what I hear about every day.
What's the biggest feature request you've been getting lately that you hear coming maybe from both sides, from Windows users as well?
So the one thing people are really taking advantage of a lot is drop shipping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's a huge feature. It used to be just a feature, kind of like the web interface used to just be a feature. It was an add-on to the product. It was an FTP server. Oh, but we have this little web interface. Well, a couple of years later, the only thing anybody cares about is the web interface. And drop shipping is kind of going that way. So a lot of it has to do with improving the drop shipment interface, improving drop shipment management, history tracking, making it easier for people to pick up drop shipped files, and improving the interface for it, and branding, all around that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What I particularly like about the product, and I can't. I mean, your product is really the only one that I've worked with closely, so I can't really speak to anything else that might be out there. Is how uniquely customizable it can be. I mean, I've got two big users of your product, and they're doing such divergent things with the same product. I just always find that kind of unique and remarkable. I have a school that's using it, and teachers are using it to create assignment drop boxes, and also to put up their curriculum for the students to be able to log in and be able to go to a page where they can see assignments, and they can also drop in assignments, but they can't modify those files. And then teachers have this access to the back end where they can go in and put their own personal lesson plans in there that the students aren't able to access. So that's kind of a unique thing. And then I have another client who's using Rumpus, and they've got these different healthcare satellite offices where they're doing one-to-one interviews with patients, and they're taking these 1 to 2 gigabyte files, and they're just uploading them into this central repository on the server that I have running. It's actually a Mac Mini server with a Drobo Thunderbolt connected to it, and it's extremely robust, and it can handle these multiple file transfers of these large files all at once. It's pretty gosh darn impressive.
Well, thanks. The issue is, like I was talking about the feature sets a minute ago. You have a problem, and you have a choice as a developer whether you're going to solve the problem or a class of problems. And the good thing about solving just the problem is that the tool that you build is more streamlined and simpler to set up. It solves a problem, and because of it, the tool is simpler. Rumpus, like I said, I'm a big fan of solving classes of problems. So, giving Rumpus the flexibility to work with in different kinds of environments and help people with problems that are all file transfer related problems, but the whole class of those, not just video editing, not just, in an academic environment, or not just print based, but a whole class of file transfer problems. The problem that you have is that it does tend to make the tool more complicated. Because it's so flexible, it's a more complicated tool to use. So, struggling, and I've thought in the past about coming out with versions of Rumpus targeted at specific industries, something that would be streamlined and easier to use, but have a more narrow focus. And then I'd need to come up with 3 or 4 of them targeted at specific industries. Right now, like I said, Rumpus solves a general class of problem, and it's not the easiest software in the world to use. But again, even to that end, you do your best to make it, approachable.
We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor this week, Blue Mango Learning Systems, makers of Clarify. You can visit clarify-it.com to check them out. And it's very relevant. A few listeners tweeted over the last couple of days that they've purchased Clarify as a result of hearing about it on our show. So it's always good to hear from happy customers and listeners. So once again, definitely go to clarify-it.com and check it out. And Jerry, I know you've been a big fan of Clarify, and you've used it a few times recently. Do you want to talk about some of those uses?
Yeah, it's got a really kind of unique tie into tonight's show. So those of you who are unfamiliar with Clarify, it's a great way to do all your documentation. I recently deployed a version of Rumpus for an academic institution that I support, and we needed to take the teachers through basically from step 1 of using Rumpus all the way to adding documents and sharing documents with their students and other faculty members. And Clarify was the ideal product for just making a very, very clean instructional document. You can export it as a PDF, you can export it as a Word document, or you could put it right into Dropbox. You can also save it out to Evernote, WordPress, or simply the web. It's just the de facto standard for creating instructional documents.
Yeah, whenever I've handed a client one of these things, I've always, gotten great feedback, and it just adds a level of like polish to, the overall project. When they walk away with like an instructional document that they can use to, educate their users, and that they can, from their perspective, they basically don't have to call you every time they have a question. They can just refer to their step 1, step 2, step 3, nice, easy to use document that you made using Clarify. It makes their life easier, and they see that as soon as you hand them that document. So it's a really great way to demonstrate your value.
It's extremely fast. You can create, as you mentioned, Joe, a very professional-looking document in lightning fast speed. And if you have to customize it, sometimes documents that you've already created for one client can be customized and tailored around and used for another client. So you can modify these documents sort of on the fly as you're using the product and make them specific to different customers that you're working with.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of clients that I've had to deliver documents to, and in the past, I've just sent an email with a 1, 2, 3 step process. It really doesn't look that professional. So we were introduced to Clarify. We rolled out with that, even branded it with our company logo, and sent it out to our clients, and it gives them that big wow factor. And as Jerry mentioned in the past, we can now reapply that if we get a similar question from another client and modify it or tweak it for their needs, and it makes it look customized for them.
If you purchase it from the clarify-it.com website, you can go right to the store and use the coupon code CCPSendMe for 15% off.
Rock on. I mean, I know this has been quite a Rumpus love fest here with us talking about how awesome the product is and stuff, but it is a true testament, and that's why we did want to have you on specifically about it. But I wanted to jump back just for a moment out of the technical piece and talk about the name and how it came to be, because that interested me a lot, and I'm sure if some people didn't get it by our show title, that it interests them as well. So could you tell me or tell us in the crowd how you came up with that?
Yeah, so I think it was probably 97. And 1997, Apple had asked us to build this software, and every software project has a code name. And, we're kicking around code names and couldn't really come up with anything that stuck. And my kids at the time were like 2 and 4 years old. So I'm reading them Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak one night, laying in bed reading this book to my kids. And Sam says, let the wild rumpus start. And I thought, oh, rumpus, that's a cool, different, it'd be a great code name for the project. So I went in the next day and I said, okay, I got a code name for the project, Rumpus. And everyone said, okay, it sounds good. So we started calling the project Rumpus. Well, software development, the product took, I don't even remember, probably 9 months or a year to develop the team. And it came time to release it. And, I own the company. I was the founder of the company, but I was under the impression that it was a democracy. So it came time to release the software. We're sitting at the release meeting, and I said, okay, I think we should call it Maxum FTP. And by then, the name Rumpus had just stuck with everyone, and I was outvoted. So we ended up calling it Rumpus, which in hindsight, it's just a stupid name. There's no meaning to it whatsoever. It was just a word that rang a bell in my head. It doesn't help sell the software. It doesn't tell you anything about it. I think it's a terrible name. But here we are 20 years later, or 17 years later since we started Rumpus, and we're kind of stuck with it.
That's kind of hysterical how you're bashing your own company. It's terrible.
Well, it's funny when someone every once in a while I get a call. It doesn't happen too much in email, but you get a phone call and someone will say, yeah, I'm using your server. It's called Rumpus, and they're almost embarrassed to say the name. And I feel for the people, and they say, yeah, we're using your software. It's FTP. I say, yeah, it's Rumpus. I know, it's okay. We'll move on,
Well, don't change it. Oh, we love it.
That's right.
And because the character's name was Max in the Maurice Sendak book,
okay.
Is Maxum, is there a hidden play on words there?
No.
Okay.
Maxum was going to be, it was actually, I originally incorporated the company as a consulting firm, and it was Maxum Maximum Information Systems. It was Maxis originally. But back in the early 90s, there was a game company that sold Mac software called Maxis. So I had to change it to Maxum.
I must have you know, John, I don't know if this is a G-rated show, but I have mentioned from time to time that it does sound like a bit of a condom manufacturer, but
What?
I don't mean to offend, but
No.
Too late, Terry. Too late.
Well, there's a magazine too. It's Maxim.
Yeah,
Oh, that's true. And
I've never heard of it though. No.
Right.
No, that's good stuff, man. And I know you've been developing for years and years, and you have a lot of projects always in the works. So, it's much appreciated that you can dedicate so much time to this particular product, which has such a big base in the Mac community. And to be honest with you, even though I support Windows stuff as well, until Jerry brought it up, I wasn't even aware that there was a Windows side install. So that's news to me, actually.
Yeah, I don't. It's a product that's out there for people who need it, and we give it all the support it's due. The software, like I mentioned before, is a little behind. I'm not comfortable with that. I think it's doing a disservice to the customers. At a certain point, it became a matter of whether or not the Windows version was going to hold the Mac version back. And so, I made the decision that the Windows version was no longer going to hold the Mac version back. So we did the release of version 8. We're still working on the release for version of Rumpus 8 for Windows. Once we have them both at parity, and all the documentation for the Windows side has been updated, the two versions are coming out lockstep. And they're both completely equal peers, then we'll start making more of a splash in the Windows world. But until then, it's mainly out there for people who've been using the Mac version for a long time, but for whatever internal or business reasons need the Windows version, need to switch to the Windows version. And I think parity is coming really soon. We're really close to releasing a beta of Windows Rumpus 8 for Windows, and once we have that parity, then we'll make a bigger splash with it.
I know you said you don't do any sort of, all your business has been word of mouth, but when you are coming out with a new beta release that you're excited about or something like that, do you reach out to your base at all of customers, or do you just kind of let them find out naturally?
Yeah, we social media hasn't been real big, but the Rumpus Talk mailing list, there's I don't know how many hundreds of people on that Rumpus Talk mailing list. All the new releases, betas and full releases get announced there. People provide feedback, and then I have a core group of probably 2 or 3 dozen people who are always suggesting updates and asking to try the latest beta. People who do the translations into non-English, because I don't speak anything other than English, and Rumpus is available in probably about a dozen different languages, including Icelandic, which is the most bizarre thing in the world. So those guys who do the translations are always testing out new versions. So it's nice. It's kind of an old school community. And it's fun. A lot of these people, I consider, friends at this point for sure.
Speaking of community, John, you've supported the ACN in the past, and I think you still have a current offer for consultants. Is that right?
Yeah. That's a no-brainer for me. Basically, we make ACN members, we have a partnership program. If anyone's interested, they can, just shoot an email to info@maxum.com, and I'll send them the link. The page on the website isn't a published link, but I shoot it to any confirmed ACN member, and they get priority tech support, and they can buy, Rumpus with a small for resale discount.
Actually, it's quite generous, John, and that's the thing I wanted to mention was that you have been so supportive of the ACN community. So thank you for that, and the fact that we have the advantage to use your product and get a copy and get some firsthand experience with it. And then, you've got this great reseller program. So there's a lot of incentive there for anyone who's listening who hasn't checked out Rumpus to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a grassroots program, the whole thing with, like I said, it's not a big company here. It's solid software because it's been around forever. But it's very grassroots, and I feel like the ACN community is, it's a great example of that. So.
Well, that's great to hear.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate it because we are out there on the front lines, in the position to, promote it and pitch it and recommend it to clients. So it's really helpful to be able to have that, personal experience with it first. And then not to mention, like Jerry said, the partner program to be able to make a little bit on each sale, and also to top it off the extra great support. So it's really a full, full service sort of program. And, again, we sort of wish more vendors would catch on to that, and help us out so we can help them out, but we really appreciate what you do for us.
Well, I throw, priority tech support in there. The truth of the matter is, I try to answer emails from everybody equally quickly. The nice thing about ACN members is that you don't have to use as many words, in your email. So it's definitely a time saver for me. So I appreciate it too.
We can get right to the point, my friend.
Yeah, you don't have to spend time explaining how to get to the library folder.
Speaking of which, do people ask you a lot about what the Mac OS Peters server means? I don't know if everyone knows that reference, but I found that intriguing when I first looked at that. Yeah,
not too often. It's one of those things you don't see it unless you know where to look in the FTP session transcripts. But Peter Lewis, I mentioned that back in the day, I think it was '97 when we released Rumpus. It was the first commercial FTP server. There was a de facto standard FTP server at the time. It was shareware written by a guy named Peter Lewis of Stairways Software, who's just a phenomenal person and a true Mac pioneer. And that's a reference to him. When we were first testing, we couldn't get the clients to behave the way we wanted them to behave. Fetch and other Mac clients wouldn't treat us like a Mac server, and we couldn't figure out why. And it was because the servers, we were reporting ourselves as Mac OS Rumpus or Mac OS Rumpus FTP, but the clients wouldn't recognize, and wouldn't treat us as a Mac. And then we changed the reported name to Mac OS Peters server, and all of a sudden they started behaving. So we basically, that's our back in 1997, we had to emulate, the existing shareware FTP server that was available.
Wow. That reminds me of just how browsers represent as different, platforms and vendors and things like that. Or WebKit compatible, or, Firefox, Mozilla, things like that.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. And, these days, the big deal was we couldn't get clients to turn on Mac binary mode. Well, Mac binary mode went away probably 10 years ago, so I could probably change the name and not worry too much about it. But, old habits.
Yeah, you never know what's going to break when you do that, when you flip that switch one day, so...
Yeah, exactly.
Or how many, System 7 machines there are out there that it's still important to. So,
yeah, you'd be shocked. It happens all the time. These little tiny changes that you think no one's ever going to notice, and all of a sudden, some mainframe computer system somewhere can't download their files.
That's funny, man. I'm always intrigued, and I'm sure the rest of the guys are too, about all aspects of the individual that develops, product like Rumpus and things like that. And I was very interested to know, if you don't mind me going down this road for just a moment, about your other project. And I thought you might want to share that with the crowd.
Yeah, well, unless you live in Northern Illinois, it's probably not going to be terribly relevant. But about a year ago, a buddy and I started a brewery here in Crystal Lake called Crystal Lake Brewing. And we just opened on August 9th. It's a production brewery, not a brew pub, which means we have a tap room, but it's not a restaurant. So we just started distribution about 6 weeks ago, and we've got about 20 different restaurants that are carrying us. We just started showing up last week in a couple of liquor stores. So it's an exciting time. It's a new challenge.
That's awesome. So, I guess I'm on the East Coast in Connecticut. It's going to be a while before you guys distribute out here, but I'll be the first to place an order if you can do residentials.
As soon as I get my liquor license in Connecticut, I'm out there, man.
Awesome.
But there's a lot to it. We're the oversight and everything, but it's been a challenge. But I've been homebrewing for 20 years. I've been that guy in my neighborhood who, someone decides to have something other than Miller Lite, and they're like, "Oh, John, what beer should I get?" And I give them some hints or some tips on beers to buy. I've been, the beer guy with everybody I know for as long as I can remember. So we finally decided just to open up a brewery here in town and try to get everybody away from Miller Lite and into craft beer.
That's no small feat either. That's a pretty big deal that you guys put that together.
It's huge. The facility is it's a 13,000 square foot facility. Ultimately, we'll be able to produce about 12,000 barrels of beer a year, which is 24,000 kegs worth of beer. Right now, the fermentation capacity we have is about 2,500 barrels, about 5,000 kegs. But hopefully we'll grow into the rest of the building. We got a canning line coming. It's going to be kind of like Laverne and Shirley. Maybe I'm dating myself, but we got a canning line coming. We get these huge vats of fermenters that make 930 gallons of beer at a pop. So it's kind of a cool project.
Wow. It's
really hard for me not to whip out an Arduino and start trying to code, fermentation controllers and everything, but it's not a good use of my time.
That'd make a great blog post, though, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have a blog on crystallakebrew.com. I do a blog over there as well.
Oh, that's cool.
And that one's less technical and more about beer.
Nice. It's funny. I was doing a quick look up on Google because I couldn't remember the name of the site for the brewery. And I looked up your name and I put in brewery, and there's no Fallon Brewery in Missouri, just in case you ever want to visit it.
There is. They're famous for their pumpkin beer.
Nice.
Believe it or not. Yeah. Yeah, they distribute it here because O'Fallon, Missouri is actually right in between Missouri and Illinois. So they distribute it both in Missouri and Illinois. I'm very familiar with their beers. They do a nice job.
Got to drink your namesake.
Yeah. Well, when I was a kid, we drove through there on our way to St. Louis once. And so I have pictures of the water tower, and the bank because it's all got my name on it,
That's great. So what was the genesis of that, John? You've always been a beer fan, but obviously it just takes more than just loving the brew to open up something like this. Where did the expertise come into play?
Yeah, well, there is a technical side to beer for sure. Any brewer will tell you brewing is both art and science. So, the science side appealed to me, and the artistic side is not something I get to express as often. So, that kind of pulls to me as well. And I've been doing Maxum, like I said, for 20 years. And I'm not done with it. I'm thrilled that I'm still here doing the same job. I honestly don't know if there's another internet software company that's as old. I know there isn't on the Mac platform, but I don't know, maybe in general, it might be the oldest internet software company. And I'm enormously proud of that, and I'm really glad that I'm still here to support my customers, and the customers support the company, and that's great. But I was ready for a new challenge. So, it's beer, craft beer is something that I loved and something I could be passionate about. So it was kind of a no-brainer.
So is it like cooking though? Like if you can bake a cake, you could bake a real big cake. Is it kind of like that in terms of I'm just trying to envision how do you do something in such a large scale like that?
You guys got to come out here, man. It's a hoot.
I'm planning on it.
So for example, when we do a brew day, for one batch of beer, we use about 1,200 pounds of grain. So if you imagine one of those giant flour sacks, that's a 55-pound sack of flour. So on any given brew day, we use about 20 of those.
Wow.
And we have this huge, it's called a mash tun. We have this huge kettle that we fill with hot water, and we literally dump this grain into the mash tun and mix it up with literally a hand-driven paddle. There's a motor-driven one at the bottom, but we also use a paddle that we just by hand to break up the clumps and everything. And it is a little bit like cooking. The biggest thing that people don't realize about brewing is that there's no room for dirtiness whatsoever, because any sort of microscopic organism that gets into your beer is going to devour that sugar just like the yeast does, and it'll create off flavors in the beer. So the attention to cleanliness in the brewery is just mind-numbing. I mean, we have this huge kettle, and I've literally, after a brew day, and you pull out 1,200 pounds of spent grain. Well, you can't get all that just with a rake. You've actually got to get into that kettle and scrub it with a scrub brush. And it's hot and wet and sticky, and it's a terrible job. But I've done it because you want to be part of the process. But yeah, so I mean, attention to cleanliness is probably the biggest difference between making beer and some other form of cooking. But it's a lot of fun. There's a ton of creativity. We have dozens of different ways to put recipes, hundreds, a totally limitless number of ways we can put recipes together to create flavors and the head on the beer and the smells of the beer and the way it looks and the way it comes across and the temperature that we want to serve it at. And there's a million variables, and it's very, very creative, and I love it.
Well, it sounds like you should be really proud. I'm looking at the website. It's really nicely done, and I like your logo. It's great.
Thanks. Yeah, you'll never guess who did the website.
Well, I mean, it might be, like you mentioned, it may be difficult for people that are not local to get out there, but some of us do travel, and I, for one, plan on making it there sometime soon.
Cool. Well, if you're in Chicago, you just hop on the Northwest train, and we're half a block from the train station here in Crystal Lake. So,
done.
Yeah, cool. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, you'll have fun. It's fun.
Very cool. I like the idea of a road trip.
That's going to happen, Joe. Don't worry.
You let me know, man. I'll roll out the red carpet.
Excellent. Well, I think you also have a good co-branding opportunity there with Maxum sponsored or Rumpus sponsored brew of some sort in the future.
There you go.
Rumpus Porter.
Nice. Yeah, we could do it. I'd have to talk to. I'm not the brewmaster. Like I said, I've been brewing for 20 years, but I wouldn't have the first clue to how to brew on this production system, without a lot of help. So our brewmaster Ryan, I'll mention it to him and see if he's got any ideas.
Yeah, see if
he's always got ideas. Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
The next ACN camp, Alan just reminded me, is in Chicago.
Well, how do you like
is
that?
It really?
Wow.
Yeah. So just be ready.
What's the date of that? We gotta crank up the assembly line there.
I don't know because I think they'd postponed it, so I don't know if we have a final date yet. But I think that might happen.
That can't possibly be a coincidence.
Right.
Well, I got to say, John, this was great. We really loved having you on. This has been just a pleasure. I mean, we had fun with this all around too, which is a great part of it. And obviously, as you can tell, the crowd definitely is very aware and very much in love with your product. So it's we appreciate you being here with us.
Oh, well, I appreciate the chance to talk to you guys, and I really appreciate your support as well.
Yeah, thank you, John. Again, it was a great interview, and thanks for coming on and for supporting the Mac community and making a great product.
Yeah, thank you for being generous in so many different ways, to us ACNs, and also, coming on the show and donating your time, and also, the great customer support, and, again, just how flexible this product is and how nicely you can tailor it to so many different customizations for the clients. It's really, really been just a real nice tool to work with. So thank you.
Well, thank you guys. And again, it's my pleasure to be on.
We'd like to thank John O'Fallon for joining us this week on Command Control Power. Go to maxum.com and check out Rumpus.
Command Control Power wouldn't exist without the support of our community. So we'd like to take a moment to ask you for your support. If you've enjoyed the content we've produced every week since 2013, please tell a friend and write a review in your favorite podcasts app to help new listeners find us. To really encourage us, you can visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support to make a monthly pledge. Joining our community of patrons will get you access to the entire catalog of over 450 episodes, plus exclusive patron-only episodes where we can speak even more candidly about the realities of technology consulting, business, and life. That's commandcontrolpower.com and click support. Special thanks to the following community members whose strong monthly support has sustained us for all these years. Ryan Gowdy, corecompetent.com. Weldon Dodd, kanji.io. Richard Wingfield, envisiondesign.net. Adam Rice, askadam.io. Mac Admins Podcast, podcast.macadmins.org. Tim Nyberg, themacguys.com. Michael Thompson, origin84.com. Matthew Waples, waples.net. Tom Puls, boxit.tech. Jerome Potters, pitpro.nl. Steve Sorbo, macsos.biz. Andy Espo, callandy.com. And Nate Sinal, weareascout.com. Thank you all very much, and thanks to our patrons at every level of support. If you enjoy the show, we really would love your support. And if you already support us and can increase your monthly pledge, we really do find that encouraging. commandcontrolpower.com and click support. Thanks very much for listening and for supporting the show.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where